Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to my Monday night show. I am Hannah Wilson and tonight's Twilight show is joined by Jim Knight, and he will be talking about his new book, The Definitive Guide to Instructional Coaching, 7 Factors for Success. So do listen in. Feel free to write in any questions you may have.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome. I feel like I haven't done a show in so long. I unfortunately had tonsillitis and then I was away on holiday, so if this feels like forever ago. And Jim will be joining us very shortly. Unfortunately, we had a slight delay in the time for tonight's show because when we planned this, the clocks hadn't changed. So our time zones, because he'll be joining us from America, were slightly different. And I will admit, as we go through the show, you will hear me flicking quite a lot through his book, as I have highlighted so much in this book. I've really enjoyed it and thoroughly recommend having your own copy and having a good read. It's one of those, I was like writing notes down the margins and highlighting things as I go. So definitely worth a read. And that's available via John Catt Publishing, one of our previous sponsors here. So this is how long the show has been on the books for, but I can't wait to have him on and be chatting about this. So if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat and we'll go through those. In the meantime, I'm just going to play on weekly news.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports that 1 in 3 primary schools has no male teachers. The study by the Warwick Business School says the proportion of schools without a male classroom teacher has increased in the last 12 months. The report's author, Dr. Joshua Fullard, said this lack of male teachers was bad for pupils. Dr. Fullard is Assistant Professor of Behavioural Science at Warwick Business School. He went on to say that there is a large body of research that shows students benefit from being educated by a teacher with certain similarities to them. The report also found that schools in special measures are less likely to have a male classroom teacher. In total, the report found that 24.3% of all state schools in England had no male classroom teachers. The report called for teachers' pay to be raised by more than 10% and for a merit-based reduction in tuition fees for university-led teacher training to be introduced. Julie McCulloch, Director of Policy for ASCL Union, said more needed to be done to attract men and women alike, and a spokesperson for the DfE said the department wanted the profession to be inclusive. North East Child Poverty Commission website reports that new figures published by the DfE confirm that more than 3 in 10 pupils across the North East are now registered for free school meals. This is an increase from January 2022. It remains the highest proportion of any part of England. The figure of 30.4% is compared with 18.8% of pupils in the South East and 19.4% in the east of England. The England-wide rate is 23.8%. All regions have seen a significant increase in the number and share of children eligible for free school meals over the last 7 years. The Guardian reports children's enjoyment of writing has fallen to crisis point, following research completed by the National Literacy Trust. The charity says an alarmingly low level of children and young people enjoy writing. The research was conducted across the UK. 34.6% of young people aged 8 to 18 said that they enjoy writing in their free time. Although 3 in 4 children starting school said that they enjoyed writing, this dropped to 1 in 4 by the age of 16. The Children's and Young People's Writing Report is drawn from over 70,000 responses from children to the charity's annual literacy survey. The number of children who say they enjoy writing in their free time has dropped by 12.2% in the 13 years since the survey began. Young people do report that they write to improve mental health and well-being and to support causes or issues they care about. Full details can be found on the National Literacy Trust website. Finally, Microsoft News reports that Taiwan has made the move to use generative artificial intelligence, or AI, to help students learn English. Teachers in the country often report that students read and write better than they speak English, as shyness and a lack of practice can hinder oral communication. A new chatbot has been funded by Taiwan's Ministry of Education to help pupils get the practice they need. The Coolie bot allows pupils to speak person to AI and build up conversation on preset topics. It also assesses punctuation, accuracy, and fluency. Taiwan has set a goal of becoming bilingual in Chinese and English by 2030. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to ask you a question. Do you use presentation software to help you deliver your lessons? 99% of you will be saying yes at this point. Have you ever considered how many presentations the average pupil in your school sees in a day, in a week, or even in their entire school life? Considering a typical secondary education, with a bit of rough maths, over a week with 5 lessons a day, there's potential to see 25 presentations. That's 100 presentations in just 4 weeks. I've left out any additional presentations like assemblies and visitors, etc. Working on a 38-week year, that's a whopping 950 presentations a year. That's a lot of presentations. Now, let's throw in some schools have a standardised slide theme and set layouts. Now we have 950 exactly the same lesson beginnings. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but do we really know what experience a pupil gets through a typical week in school? Are they being engaged, or are they being presented with the same visual stimulus day in, day out, simply causing them to fly below the radar. If you're like me, you're now thinking, how do I make my presentation stand out? Is there a presentation software out there that's better than all the rest? In my humble opinion, this is like the visualizer versus HD webcam argument. What works for some does not work for others because all subjects are not the same, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but please bear in mind that what works for one teacher may not work for another. A search for free presentation software returns no less than 24 apps I recognise. Some are interactive like Mentimeter, others have more dynamic transitions like Prezi. Most also have additional features and add-ons you can purchase. I know what you're saying, come on Steve, which is the best though? Well, the answer is simple, but I've run out of time, so I'll have to tell you next week. In the meantime, please consider the number of presentations a typical pupil is subjected to in your school. Does this need to change, or does it work? And how do you know? Do you have a preferred presentation software, and what are the features that make it stand out for you? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
So I've really enjoyed reading this book. I have been reading it over the last few weeks, and it's been really easy to read. I feel like I already know Jim because I've already kind of listened to his voice almost through this book. So it's going to be actually lovely to talk to him in person about it. I had to change the schedule of the podcast, so I think he's accidentally gone onto the wrong one. So give us one moment and hopefully he'll be joining us. But yeah, the book is split into 7 different sections. So the first one is partnership principles. Then number 2 is communication skills. Number 3 is coaches as leaders. And number 4 is the impact cycle. Number 5 is data. Number 6 is the instructional playbook. And number 7 is system support. But they're really easy to kind of read through. So they're just to kind of start with like a little bit of a scenario, and then they kind of go through a lot of theory and different options to try. And it's really broken down and easy to read. And I love the fact that at the end of each chapter as well, you have a sum up, a reflection questions section going deeper. So you've got deeper reading and different links to look to, and kind of what next. So questions for things for you to try. So it's really quite interesting to read doing that. So I've enjoyed it and found it quite easy to read, and I've highlighted lots of it. And I feel like this is one that Tom and Nathan are going to like, because there's lots of kind of good quotes in it as well that I've highlighted. So I really do enjoy it. Those sections are actually kind of in bigger chunks as well. So there's the first section is who you are, which has the partnership principles, the communication skills, and the coaches as leaders. And then the what you do, which is the impact cycle, the data, and the instructional playbook, and then where you work, which is the system support. So it's quite nice that it's structured in that way. Welcome to our show. I was just saying to the listeners that I really, really enjoyed reading this. I feel like I already know you, because I feel like I've known like your little chats that go on in the book, which is really nice. So it's nice to speak to you at last. What you've written lots of books. So what made you decide to write this one?
Well, first off, I saw where you read the book, and I can only assume that would make it a more pleasant experience. So it looked like it was a lovely place to be reading.
This is a very late heat wave for Britain. We've been after a bit of sun for a long time. This is the first time we've had a nice weekend, so I couldn't help myself.
I think you did the right thing. So a long time ago, like 2003, we had an approach to professional development that was originally, we used the term learning consultant, and I was a researcher at the University of Kansas. We didn't really like the term learning consultant. Then I switched to the name instructional collaborator around 1999. And we used that term, and we had quite a bit of funding to do the research. And then around 2003, I switched the name to instructional coach, because I kept hearing people use the term coach. I'd never heard anybody use the term instructional coach. Then I wrote a book or an article which ended up being the first article on instructional coaching around 2004. And then a book, which was the first book on instructional coaching. And so since then, we've done a lot of research, and I wanted to create one book that kind of captured everything in sort of a concise way. So if you're wanting to know what's it all about, how do you communicate, how do you figure out what strategies to use, how do you gather data, it could all be in one place. And I'm glad I did, because from what I can see online in social media, it seems like in the UK, or in England at least, there's an understanding of instructional coaching that's a lot different than what we've seen as a result of our 25 years of research. So I'm glad the book's out there. I'm really grateful to John Cadd for publishing a British version of it.
It's one of those that the instructional coaching, I feel like it's been around in the UK for a few years, but certainly the last kind of 3-4 years, it's really kind of, it's quite common to hear it used now. But I think it is a case of making sure that people are using it properly, and that's what's great about your book. It's quite reflective, and it has lots of do's and don'ts and kind of what it is and what it isn't, which is really nice.
Yeah, I'd say if what people are doing is working, keep doing it. But there's a chance it might not be working. If not, then it's worth stepping back and reflecting. And if you want long-term sustainable change, you probably need to treat teachers like professionals, and which means you honor their professional judgment. What I'm not really clear on, and maybe you can help me with this, Hannah, is what the term instructional means in the UK. Because in most of the world, instructional is a sort of generic word for teaching. It's a word like teaching, except it focuses on the practices of the teacher. But it seems like it has a more specific definition in the UK. Is that fair to say?
It's kind of to give instruction but specifically in teaching, and it's quite often used when we're teaching our trainee teachers. Is you quite often hear about instructional coaching in terms of giving them pedagogy and giving them techniques to implement, and from that kind of way is our kind of instructional coaching, is kind of giving them those strategies.
Right. So we would say the term is not like that. We use instruction in the same way Carol Tomlinson does with respect to differentiated instruction, for example. It's really just about the professional practice of teachers, and then having a conversation that honors the professionalism of teachers. It's as appropriate for the most acclaimed teacher in the school as it is for the brand new teachers.
And I've very much highlighted this. I've got lots of bits that I really, really like. There's like little bits that pop out, and there's lots of bits that I read. I'm like, oh yes, that's me. Oh, I do that. So it definitely spoke to me in a lot. And your first one is on partnership principles, and it talks about kind of choice and why choice is important.
Right. Well, we would say choice is important because it's there's a whole host of reasons. I mean, telling people what to do sounds like a quick fix, but it just doesn't work for a whole host of reasons. And not giving them choice, because first off, it assumes a technocratic take on teaching, that there's one solution. I just have to tell you it and you'll do it. But the reality of teaching is it's so complex that it requires adaptive solutions, not technical solutions. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There needs to be a sort of mutual adaptation, adjustments, and changes in order to hit a goal. The second thing is most of us aren't motivated by other people's goals for us. We're motivated by our own goals. The third thing is, as Edgar Schein said in Helping, if people perceive us as putting ourselves one up and putting them one down, they're not likely to embrace it. There's a whole host of other reasons, not the least of which is just because we tell somebody to do something doesn't mean they'll do it. The reality is, whether you accept it or not, or like it or not, teachers have an enormous amount of choice, because we're all skilled at nodding our head yes and doing nothing. And so acknowledging choice up front, the reality is, just because I say it doesn't mean it's going to happen. It leads to a much richer conversation about what really does happen in the classroom. Because if the nature of the conversation is, I'm going to tell you what to do and you nod yes, chances you'll do it aren't that great. And so I think having a back and forth conversation between professionals is important. The other thing is, because choice is central to what a professional does, if we want the schools we want, I think we have to treat teachers like professionals, because we don't want unskilled laborers teaching our kids.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
And I think it's that they say, isn't it, that you're a topic of the people that you hang out with and the people that you talk to. And I think that's what made me such a good teacher, is that I surround myself with lots of other teachers that I regularly talk to. Like, I quite enjoy teacher chat, clearly, doing this.
Right.
And my mum's a teacher and my sister's a teacher. And I really enjoy that chat of, and it's like you said, no class is the same. You can teach the same lesson multiple times, but it's never going to be the same thing, because it's different children each time, and there's the surroundings and the solutions, and the day is different. So it's being able to have that adaptive kind of solutions to the way you teach, that's what make teachers good teachers, I think, is how you can cope with that.
Yeah, I think there are some one-size-fits-all things that are really simple. Like, as my friend Christian Van Nuremberg says, if a car pulls up to you and says, "Can you tell me how to get to City Hall?" They don't want you to say to them, other times you've tried to find City Hall, what's worked for you. They just want directions. And there are things like that, like, how do I use this software, or how do I fill in this form, or how do I, there are lots of things that are technical. When complexity scientists talk about complexity, they usually use raising a child as complex work. Well, if raising one child is complex, how complex is it to try to raise a whole classroom, or at least teach a whole classroom of students? So complexity really demands adaptive responses. That is, you make adjustments that fit the particular needs of kids and the unique strengths of the teacher, and so forth.
And in terms of how you kind of think to do that, so I suppose it's all about having that kind of that dialogue, isn't it, and making sure that you're kind of both on that same page, like that you can have those conversations quite openly. You've got to have like an open relationship. It can't be that talking down to them, otherwise it's not going to build up at all.
Yeah, I mean, my belief would be, when there's a cartoon I saw a couple of days ago, and it was this sort of corporate person sitting behind a desk, and his employee came in to talk to him, and he said, "Come in, Franklin. I'm excited to communicate down to you. We don't really want to have a one up, one down kind of relationship when we're professionals. We want to be acknowledged and recognized as professionals." And so, but the bottom line is, if I thought telling people what to do was the quickest way to improve the quality of instruction, then that's what I would propose. But the reality is, like, I'll give you an example. There's a thing in the United States called the CHAMPS, which is a great, I think, a model for creating a positive learning community for students. And the idea is, you develop expectations for every activity. And lots of teachers in some schools are told to use CHAMPS. So what they do is they post their expectations in the room. They tell the kids, these are the expectations. They never refer to them again. But if you have an adaptive conversation or a dialogue where the teacher has set a goal, I want a certain level of engagement on the part of the kids, or I want certain kinds of responses from the kids, then you have to keep going until you hit the goal. And so CHAMPS doesn't become something you just slap on the wall to please your principal. It becomes a tool, a power tool you use to hit a powerful goal for your students.
And kind of, because we're finding at the moment, since COVID, that students are kind of harder to kind of get on side. They're a little bit tougher to teach than they used to be. They're not quite as resilient. Have you found the same thing, that it does take a little bit longer to get those expectations kind of met?
Well, there's all kinds of problems. I don't know if problems is the right word, but there are all kinds of new challenges as a result of COVID. I mean, people have dealt with trauma. People have. I don't think we fully understand the consequences of what we just went through. So it's affecting teachers and it's affecting students. But I think every classroom is different. Every school is different. Every community is different. So I don't know that there's a generalizable thing other than to say it's not easy. It's been a challenging time. This year it seems wasn't quite as tough as the year before, but it's still been a tough year for sure. We're losing a lot of
Hopefully,
teachers.
it'll just keep getting a little bit better.
Right.
But I was the bit that I found quite shocking actually at the start of your book that I was like, oh, I must mention it, was that about the research that you did, or that you discussed about how teachers say that they are the least likely of all occupations to say that their opinion seems to count. I was like, actually, I feel that's quite true for us, especially with over in England, we've been having lots of strikes about teaching pay, but the public perception of teachers is very much, oh, you get loads of holidays and you don't work long hours. And it's quite interesting that even though we're in a kind of a job where we get to voice our opinions to the students and we're quite an influential role in terms of the students, that actually as educators, we don't feel kind of very heard.
Yeah, with Shane Lopez, he did that work for Gallup, and the interesting thing was he said teachers started out more engaged than any other profession, but it dropped off radically. And I actually met Shane. He used to live in Lawrence after he did the research, and his take, I think, is that because teachers don't have a voice, that's why their engagement drops off so radically. Because he would say voice is a critical part. Feeling like your opinion matters. I mean, Gallup did a survey of over 1 million people. I think interviewed 80,000 people. They came up with this list of 12 things that make for a successful, productive, good employee. And one of them was, at work, I feel like my opinion matters. And what Lopez found was that teachers were the least likely to say that was true of them.
And I think that's what kind of why we need a bit more kind of coaching and having those conversations in teaching, because right. I feel that if we can have, because that's especially with the hierarchy within a school, that teachers need to feel that their concerns are being met. Otherwise, that's going to like stop with your teacher retention, and they're going to want to go and move somewhere else that aren't going to listen. So it's something that schools need to kind of address, I think.
Yeah, I think I really think that we have to listen to. The first thing is seeing the teacher as a professional, as opposed to someone who follows a script. It's acknowledging the reality that anybody can nod their head yes and just do the minimum. We might get compliance, but we don't get commitment without some element of choice. And but learning is a fun thing. I mean, learning is I'd say it's one of the 4 or 5 most important things in a fulfilling life. And when you're together with a person in a learning conversation, where the two of you are sharing ideas and you're excited about what's happening, and there's mutual respect and trust, and both voices are heard in the conversation, then I think that's a really good thing. And I think that's what will keep teachers in the profession and motivated, is for them to feel like, oh, my voice does matter, and I do have a say, and my brain is a part of this conversation. It's not just being dumped on.
That's kind of my favorite time of the year, because here we have trainee teachers. They kind of swap between schools throughout the year, so you only get them for about half the year. But I really enjoy having those conversations with my trainees, of getting them to reflect, but also explaining them to why all the pedagogy and the theory behind how a lesson's put together, and why it's done in a certain way, and the impact it's meant to have. It's not by chance that it's put together like that. There's a lot of kind of detail that goes into a lesson behind it. It's not just we rock up and we kind of chat to them. There's lots of a lot of theory from lots of different educators that have kind of paved the way for education to keep evolving and help students learn the best that they can.
Yeah, we would say the focus needs to be on the kids and not on the strategy. That you start with the kids. And so as you coach, maybe through the use of video, maybe by interviewing kids, maybe by looking at student work, maybe by giving the teacher an opportunity to really look deeply at each student, what I call a close watch, maybe any number of different ways, but the teacher gets a clear picture of reality. And then you ask questions to help them identify a goal. Essentially, where are you now? Where do you want to get to? And then once you figured out what the goal is the teacher wants to go after, it's usually going to be either an achievement goal or an engagement goal. And that can get pretty granular in terms of the way it is. Once you've got a goal, an emotionally compelling goal the teacher really wants to hit, then it's time to say, okay, now what strategies can we look at to try to help you hit this goal? When you do it the other way around, when you focus on the strategy, it asks teachers to do something that seems awkward and uncomfortable, and they're less motivated to do it because of the strategy. They're more motivated to do it when they're trying to hit a goal, a student-focused goal. And so for us, the student-focused goal is a really, really critical part of the whole business. We start with kids, then we identify the strategy. We don't start with the strategy and then try to fit it into the classroom.
I think that's it. I had a student last year that was like, "Oh, this my sessions are an assessment. I need to do some assessment because I need to tick off that criteria." And I was like, "But why are you doing the assessment to tick off the criteria?" I was like, "But how does it benefit the students? So if you're going to do the assessment, I want to know how it's benefiting the students. And then we're not doing it to tick a box. We're doing it because it needs to benefit them in some way." And it completely flipped her way of thinking, and she stopped thinking of her course as kind of ticking the milestones and started thinking about how do I get that kind of topic to benefit the students. And it was a real switch in the way she taught, and it was really interesting.
That sounds great.
And I think this is an interesting one, that you said that the coaching, it seems, is less likely to happen without a learning partner. And I think it is, you need other educators, don't you? You can't just do it on your own. And I think some people struggle to say, "Oh, I need help with my teaching," or "I'm really struggling with this class." That we're quite perfectionists as teachers. We want to seem that we know what we're doing and that we're good at it, but it is a difficult profession, and it's okay to talk and ask for help, no matter what stage you are at your career, because quite often it tends to be sometimes older teachers that have been doing it a long time are like, "I know everything. I don't need to learn anything new. I know what I'm doing." But actually, I think if we can kind of open teaching up to constantly evolving, it's going to benefit teaching as a general thing, and also help teachers stay in the profession as well.
Yeah, I think teachers are real learners. I mean, if you're watching a teacher who teaches the same lesson multiple times in the day, it's going to look different the third or fourth time they do it than it did the first time, because they're going to learn from the experience. In my experience, teachers are reading all the time. They're looking for different things. Not everybody's the same, but they first off, they understand the power of learning and they live it out. But professional development that puts the teachers in a one-down position and tells them what they should do and doesn't involve their brain, that's not learning. That's something else, something dehumanizing. And so the professional learning should tap into that desire everybody has to want to be a learner and to grow and develop. And then you've got something exciting, you know. And I don't know if it's really them asking for help, or it's just a recognition that we're not perfect. There's always room for growth, and how fun and exciting it is to try to reach more kids when our voices are heard and when we're able to use our brains and we're involved in the learning, and when we develop hope and tools that help us achieve our goals.
It's like, I guess, like performance management here is quite often seen as like
Right.
a negative thing, like, "Oh, I have to hit those goals, otherwise I'm not going to progress." But actually, I think it should be flipped on its head and seen as like, "Oh, this is my opportunity to focus on something that I'm really interested in within education." And it should be kind of more of an exciting opportunity, as opposed to being like something that you're measured by.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if performance management as well as you, of course, but I think what I would say is we can't lose sight of how complex the job of teaching is, and that the only appropriate response to that complexity is humility. To say to the person, you know, I've got some ideas, but I can't promise you they work. What do you think about this? Let's work it out together. Because the idea that I can just show up with a one-size-fits-all solution to something as complex as a classroom, I don't think it's a realistic situation given what happens in a classroom. But if I show up and we work things out together, and that doesn't mean I silence myself. I just don't try to control you. You know, I should share my thinking and share it. We're all about using checklists to be really precise with our explanations, but we also say, but you may want to modify this to make it fit for you in your class with your students. And so we don't just give it to the teacher. We work it out together.
It's having that we also autonomy, having that autonomy to still have the structure to fit within the school. So there's that consistency, but you have autonomy to kind of twist it and adapt it and make it work for your students. And you know your students better than anybody else.
Right. But I would say consistency and autonomy are not in opposition. In fact, I don't think you can have consistency without autonomy. Because without some element of choice and people are just complying, that's not consistency. They're just going to do the bare minimum so they don't get fired. If you really want a deep level of commitment, what people might call collective efficacy, you really need people who are committed, and they're not going to be committed unless they choose. They'll do the bare minimum, but the deep level of commitment where they roll up their sleeves and they're all in, that involves choice to some extent. Now, not everything's a choice. You can't say, I teach better after a couple glasses of wine. I think I'll put a little cooler in my classroom. That's probably not going to work. You can't show up at 11 o'clock. If the district commits to some kind of initiative, you can't say, I'm out, I'm not doing it. There's a lot you have to do when you work in an organization. But in terms of some of the specifics that happen in your classroom as a professional, and just like any other professional, you need to be able to use your professional judgment.
And I think that's leads quite on to, I think it was your communication skills. There was one of the scenarios where you talked about how she went in, there was one of the people you spoke about went into the school and people were quite keen to have her help, but then they didn't didn't necessarily implement everything afterwards. And I think it is those kind of how you have those conversations in order to have things have a great effect.
Right. I think that's true.
Although I must admit, this is probably my best line from the book, I think.
Okay,
it's the great questions bit. It says the best questions are like fertilizers for the garden of learning. I was like, I do enjoy that one. That one got double highlighted.
Right.
Because it's about having it's not only how we question the kids to get further answers out of them, but it's how we question ourselves on how our lessons went, but also how we question those in our department for how they're teaching, and how we question our trainees and in getting them to be reflective. It's really interesting that the level of kind of how to go with questioning.
Yeah, well, I think questioning is a way you communicate your respect for the other person. I mean, if you say something like, don't you think small group activities would increase engagement? You're not really asking a question. You're just giving advice with a question mark at the end of it. And so you want to ask questions that really do honor the intelligence of the other person and let them know. And you ask them from a place of curiosity. And I think when it comes to something, as I've said a few times here, as complex as a classroom, that being curious is the appropriate response, being open to hearing what the person has to say and involving them in the conversation. And, the reality is we think our advice is way more valuable than it is, and we think people want it way more than they do. And so I think starting asking more and telling less there's a book by that title. That's a really great, strong stance.
I like that because I found like when you were there's a bit in it where you were saying about how don't cut in and things like that, and I'm certainly learning that, becoming a host on here and asking questions. But I found myself doing that with my trainees to try and reassure them. But I realised actually I probably, after reading your book, maybe I shouldn't jump in, because quite often they'll say, "Oh, I found this," and I'm like, "Oh, I do that too," or "That's because of this," and actually I need to kind of let them speak a little bit more before I kind of offer advice, and kind of more probe them to make sure they're understanding it before I offer the outcome at the start.
Well, when it comes to coaching, we would say it starts with a goal. You need some kind of goal to drive the whole process, because the goal is the way in which you determine whether or not what you're doing works. And so the goal could be an engagement goal. And engagement can break down to behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, emotional engagement. Do the kids feel hope? Do they feel safe in school? Are they getting out of the activity what they're supposed to get out of it? Would be cognitive engagement. Or it could be achievement, and achievement is probably knowledge, skills, or big ideas. And big ideas is like the top of Bloom's taxonomy. And then with achievement, you're looking at, have they acquired it? Can they make connections between their big ideas? Can they transfer their knowledge? And so all of that information, I mean, a coach needs to understand what that is. And then we would say they have to have a playbook of strategies that hit that help people hit those goals, whether they're engagement or. So if a teacher is struggling with behavioral engagement, kids are just off task, disruptive, it's not working. It's going to be tough if the coach says, I got nothing. It's going to be way more helpful if the coach can say, here's a menu of options. Which one of these gives you the most confidence? And let the person choose what they're going to do. And then if the person says, well, I really want to work on this, and we think that's a bad idea, we say, is it all right with you if I share what I'm thinking about this? So we don't silence ourselves, but we recognize the person's going to do what they choose to do. So we let them choose, because that's just a reality of the situation. So we probably wouldn't use the term trainee, but in that kind of situation, if the person comes to me and what they want is an explanation, or they're totally open and excited about learning something, and I can describe it simply and clearly in a technical way, of course you would do that. But if the person didn't ask for it, and the challenge they're facing is much bigger than a one-size-fits-all technical solution, that's where the coaching makes more sense. So a teacher whose kids are just not responding to classroom discussion, probably there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to that. Probably you have to try things. She might say, I want a certain a percentage of kids responding, and I want certain levels of responses. That's my goal. Let's see what it takes. And so they may change their questioning and realize, well, we need to use thinking prompts to generate more conversation, or this kind of question works, or maybe we'll do think, pair, share before it, or my kids who are multilinguistic aren't speaking up. You keep making adjustments until they make it work. That's how we would do it.
It's that kind of cycle, isn't it, of keeping
right
and looking. And I just think it is that I quite like turning it on my students. If they ask me a question of how something's gone, I'll like, right, but what have you got in your kind of arsenal that can help you build up this question? Or if I then ask the neighbour like something that will help link it to it, it's kind of using it to help them get there themselves. I suppose it's a little bit scaffolding, isn't it, with kind of helping them build that confidence so that they can repeat it in the future.
Yeah, we would say that the concept of resistance shouldn't exist in coaching, because resistance assumes the person's not doing what we want them to do. They're resisting us. And we think, and this is similar to the whole body of research on what's called motivational interviewing, we think the first thing is to help the teacher identify an emotionally compelling goal they want to hit. And then once we've got the goal, then we do what we can to help them hit the goal. And so we distinguish between what I call push coaching and pull coaching. And I'm not the first one to use that terminology. Others have used it too. But push coaching is I'm trying to get you to do something I've decided you should do. And pull coaching is you've identified a goal, and the whole process is pulled forward by that goal you really want to hit. And so that's why we focus on a change in students first. That becomes the emotionally compelling goal. And then a coach should have a playbook of high impact teaching strategies they can share to help the teacher hit that goal. Now, they may not have what the teacher needs. They might have to do research and find other things, but often there's a core set of, say, 15 or 20 strategies you can say, these things help the person hit the goal.
And I think it links to another highlighted area. There's a great question. You should illuminate a conversation the way a light bulb opens up a dark room. And I think it's that you're kind of getting them to understand the tools that they've got to kind of get to where they want to be, to get to that outcome, to feel success.
Did I say that?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, I like that. That's good. I probably quoted somebody else. That sounds too good to be coming.
No. That one is all you. That one is all you. It's in the summary section because I really I like that. I like the fact that I could read it because I'm dyslexic, so I'm quite a slow reader. While I'm doing my second masters, I have to read a lot, so I'm like, oh crikey. But it's that kind of, it's quite funny because this all talks about uncluttering your mind so that you can focus. But then I'm like, I quite like the fact that I can read it all, and then I'm like, I can just remind myself with the summary. And then the reflection questions are really nice as well. And the fact that you kind of makes you think about your own practice and kind of what your experiences is, and kind of can think about those different areas. And then
Right.
I'm also one of those that I very much love the fact that you've going deeper, so I can then go find other articles and other books and things, and some of them I have read as well, so I'm like, oh yes, I know that bit. And then your what next, is there a reason that you've added that, because that's onto each one? Did that just something natural that came about, or was that something that you decided from the start that you were going to have in each section?
The components at the end?
Yeah.
Well, it's evolved a little bit, but it is pretty much, it's been there since the first book. Like the going deeper section, part of that is just to acknowledge that anything I say is the product of a whole body of other people's thinking. And so some of the key people would be mentioned, their books would be mentioned in the going deeper section, so people can read more if they want to. And then the learning map concept, the concept map, kind of at the start of each chapter, people have given me a lot of feedback that they found those maps at the beginning kind of helpful to give them a picture. And that's a teaching practice we use, is the use of learning maps.
Yeah.
And so I guess it kind of evolved, but let me see what's I'm going to go look and see what's in the back of the instructional coaching book. I think it's pretty similar. I think it's, I think there's a book that's a collection of articles that Kurt Vonnegut's written about writing, and the book is called Pity the Reader. And it's like, write in a way that they can understand. And so I do try to do that, but I also think you have to be careful not to insult the reader, Yeah, so the first one says just the going deeper and to sum up. It had the maps at the beginning of it. I'm looking at the first instructional coaching book. So it had the maps, the going deeper, and the summary at the end of it. So it's evolved over time.
Yeah, because I just think it's very popular in the UK at the moment to kind of have a book and have staff read it and then reflect on it. So it's quite nice in that respect that if a school wanted to use your book and focus on that kind of area of coaching, that they could use those reflective questions within their department time to discuss it, which is something that I like. I think that's something I've always liked, where schools do that in terms of their CPD, that everyone's reading the same thing, and then they've almost got those their coaching questions that start those chats, so you don't have those nervous tentative bits where nobody really wants to say their opinion. You've got those areas where you can instantly kind of start those conversations, which is really nice.
Right. Would it be helpful if I sort of described what it would look like to have an instructional coach work with a teacher?
Yeah, that would be great.
So let's say a coach, the teacher comes to the coach and says, I need some coaching, I need some help. I'll pick a real example. It's a teacher who was her third year teaching, and she was in a school district in Washington, and she was part of a research study we did. And she went to the coach and said, look, I'm struggling with writing. And the teacher was from a family of teachers. Her grandmother was a teacher. Her mother taught kindergarten for 30 years. Her sister was a teacher. It was no surprise she chose teaching over law, but she couldn't teach writing. And she said, when I looked at my students and I saw them struggling, I knew how they felt, because that's how I felt teaching writing. And she said, when they would ask me questions I didn't know the answer to, I would just move on to the next topic and ignore them. And so she went to the coach. The coach needed help, she needed help with the coach, and the coach video recorded the teacher's class. And then they had a conversation. So the teacher looked at the video. She said the video was really helpful because it helped her see what the class felt like through the kids' eyes. But they set a goal not really based on the video. They set an achievement goal, and together they co-constructed a rubric, a single point rubric or a checklist, that said, this is what a good paragraph will look like. And then the coach and teacher worked together, and they decided that the teacher would use a learning map to help the kids understand the content so they could see it visually in front of them, and use the rubric to self-assess, to get feedback on their writing. So then the coach went in the classroom, modeled how to use the rubric, modeled how to use the learning map. And they used to get together all the time and look at the progress of the students. And at one point, the coach said, or the teacher said, I just can't keep up with the grading. This rubric is great, but it's too much. It's taking me weeks and weeks to do the grading. So they switched to having the teacher teach the kids how to give each other feedback. And eventually they hit the goal. And when they hit the goal, the teacher said, I'm not letting my students down. I can see that they all hit the goal. And the teacher actually invited the coach into the classroom, and they celebrated together. And the teacher said, now I have some ideas to move forward. And they could both see the kids who weren't going to succeed now succeeded. That's how the whole thing works. So we have 3 parts: identify. Identify involves getting a clear picture of reality, identifying a goal, and identify a strategy. So that teacher looked at video, they talked about how kids were performing, they set a goal, that was the rubric. The strategy was the rubric and the learning map. Then in the learning stage of it, the second part of the process, what the coach does is helps the teacher implement, sometimes by describing things with a checklist and modifying it to fit the teacher's needs. And then sometimes modeling. In this case, the coach co-taught, because she said, I wanted to be in the classroom when the teacher was struggling and didn't know how to answer the questions. So she co-taught for a while to support the teacher. And then they tried it out, and they had some roadblocks along the way, the most significant one being the time factor. But there were other things like, should we start with the main idea and work to the details, or we should start with the details and work to the main idea, and other kinds of issues. So they finally hit the goal. And that teacher told me if she hadn't worked with the coach, she would have quit. She would have left the job. And I saw her principal years later, like 3 or 4 years after the fact. And the principal said to me, she'd become a real leader in the district. And that's how it works. Identify a clear picture of reality, a goal, a strategy, learn the strategy, implement it. It usually doesn't work the way you implement it, so you have to modify it and adjust it and adapt it until the goal eventually gets hit, or at least you get as close to the goal as you can get. That's the process. And then you can do another cycle if you want to focus on something else and keep the learning going.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? You just keep adapting, and I love team teaching, especially my student teachers, and I think it's a great way to build their confidence, especially if they're like a little bit nervous. That actually, if they see you doing it with them, it kind of builds that. But I wanted to bring you back to videoing because I found that really interesting. So. So my role, I haven't really explained myself. So I'm an art teacher, but I'm head of an art department, but I'm also national subject lead. So we have 46 schools across the trust, and I help all the art departments across the trust. So we have a lot of online learning and stuff. So I do video those because we have to send them out. So I do sometimes get brave and watch those, and I do record a lot of my demonstrations to be able to replay for the students. But when you're recording, do you record just the teacher, or do you record all the students as well, like from the back, so you're getting the whole reaction?
It depends on what the teacher wants, and it depends on what the teacher's interested in. So if the teacher says, what do you want to do? Ordinarily, what I would do is I would record the teacher when the teacher is talking, and I would record the students. I keep the camera going, but probably my iPhone. And I record the students when they're doing their thing. But the teacher might be really interested in how kids are responding to questions. In that case, I might want to sit up front and just record the kids during questioning. But it's ultimately what the teacher wants to do is how we would do it.
I imagine it's one of those that once you get over the initial kind of fear of it, it becomes easier. Because I would think when I read it, I was like, actually, I'd really love to film my students and how they're reacting when I'm talking, right, and just see that rather than looking at me as the kind of subject of the video.
Right. Well, yeah, the first time you look at it, and nobody ever looks at their video and goes, man, I'm younger and thinner than I thought. People look at it and they go, I'm never going to wear those purple pants again. That's their first reaction, is they're going to change something, or I need to go on a diet, or I'm getting old, or whatever it might be. But after you've watched it, and also I wouldn't force video on people. I think it's pretty emotionally complex. And if you force people, it's just going to engender resistance. And there are a lot of other ways of getting a clear picture of reality. But if the teacher's, willing to take the risk, after you watch it once, then you can start to see more. And one of the cool things about video is you can go back and you look at stuff over and over. And sometimes, let's say you're trying to improve the first 5 minutes of your class. You could just record that every day. Just record the first 5 minutes and look at it and then the next day try something different. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Or let's say you have a group of teachers who are learning how to use, I don't know, the Frere model to teach concepts. And each one tries it out and they video record themselves and they get together and talk about how it worked, and they use video. So video can accomplish, and the big thing is, for a number of reasons, we don't have a clear picture of what it looks like, most of us, when we do what we do. Part of it is perceptual errors. So things like confirmation bias and habituation. We literally don't see what other people see. But the other thing is we have defense mechanisms, which are necessary to move through the world. But defense mechanisms minimize the problem. They blame other people. They come up with other reasons. There's all kinds of reasons why it's not me that's the problem. But video cuts through the defense mechanisms, and video cuts through the perceptual errors. It shows you things more or less as they are, and often that's a catalyst for change.
Because I've been learning about, I don't know, correct me if I'm saying it wrong, the Johari window is all about kind of looking at your blind spots and seeing the things that you're not quite thinking about yourself. And I found that quite eye-opening. Like, I back myself in certain areas of teaching, but there's little bits that actually I need to not ignore because, or just think about actually how I'm delivering them, because it's not necessarily how I think it is in my head. So I do think like being reflective in that way is really kind of useful.
So yeah, we would show the teacher the video, and then we sit down to talk about it, and we found it's better to watch it separately. And again, this is only one way of doing it. We found when you watch it together, the conversation's just too stilted and awkward. So you watch it, I'll watch it, and then we get together, and then I'll say, I might have the video there, but I've never gone back to look at the video. We just have a conversation about what the person saw.
Yeah.
And then I say, okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how close was that to a 10? And they'll say, well, maybe 5. And then I'll say, okay, why'd you pick 5? And if they have a whole bunch of negatives, I'll say, well, you didn't pick a 1. A lot of things are going well. What did you see that was going well? And then I say, okay, what would it take to move closer to a 10? And then they say, well, I could do this or that. And I say, well, would you want that to be your goal? And then, yeah, well, if that's your goal, you probably thought a lot about this. What are you thinking you might do to hit the goal? And we keep going until they've got a goal and how they're going to measure it and a strategy they're going to use to hit it. But it's all driven by the professional. It's not driven by some observer who's watched 1 hour of the class and it's going to give them the God's truth.
I like that you watch it separately and then come together, and then you don't have the awkwardness of watching it together, which is good. But I did that. You did. I've heard of SMART goals, but you in your book refer to peers goals. Goals that are powerful, easy, emotional, compelling, researchable, and student focused. I really like that. That appealed to me way more than a SMART goal.
Well, there's some problems with the SMART goal. One of them is that timely. How do you?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you set a timely goal for other people? I can set a timely goal for me to do the laundry or something, or clean out my closet, or clean my desk, or finish a project. If I'm the only variable, I can set a timely goal. But I can't set a timely goal for my cable guy to come and fix my cable TV. He's going to come when he's going to come. In a classroom full of students, it's unrealistic, I think, to think that you can say when you're going to hit your goal, because there's just so many variables. Now, timely can mean we're going to break down when things are going to happen. I don't think that's a bad idea. And then there's some other things that I think are critical, like, is the goal emotionally compelling? Is the goal a powerful goal, one that's going to have an unmistakably positive impact on kids, a lasting impact? Kids will be different next year because of this goal. The trouble with SMART is sometimes what you have happen is people are just checking off the boxes. Okay, I've been specific, and this is, it's realistic, and they just check, as opposed to saying, is this a goal I really care about, emotionally compelling? And then I think it's important to ask, is this as easy as we can go? Can we find a simpler way, a more direct path to the goal than this way? A more efficient way. So that's the peers process. And then the reachable part, the R in peers, is about, it is kind of the SMART stuff of how we know we've hit the goal, what's our finish line, and do we have a strategy, or can we identify a strategy? And so So we put that all together. Is it powerful, easy, emotionally compelling, reachable? And then the student focus is key too. A teacher focused goal is probably one that won't be sustained. That is, I'm gonna try to ask a different kind of question. I'm gonna set up this kind of activity. I'm gonna use this technology. But a student focused goal, set the student focused goal, then you figure out the strategy, then you're off to the races.
Yeah, it has to be about them, and I think especially, and it has to be reachable. You have to be able to kind of feel like you're making progress. Otherwise, you're going to get disheartened. It's that kind of good thing.
Right.
But
The flip side is also true. When you are making progress, it feels. Teresa Amabile at Harvard, I think she's at Harvard, talked about the progress principle. As you see yourself developing progress, your motivation goes up, and you're building your own agency, which is critical to hope.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centered French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
And I think that's where it comes to, like, because you go on to data next and kind of how you measure those goals. And I think I love data. I love knowing and seeing that my students are succeeding. But I just think there's so many different ways of data in education, and also sometimes it can look impressive, but it doesn't necessarily tell us much. So it's kind of that fine line of deciding what data you should be using and what types, I think is quite interesting. And at what point you almost decide. I almost feel like I need to decide now what focuses I'm going to do for next year, so I know when I'm going to kind of look at those things and how it's going to look. So, and how am I going to know it's measured at the right times?
Yeah. Too often, from our perspective, the data is gathered too infrequently. So,
Yeah.
like if you only gather it once every 2 months, it's not that helpful. I always say it's like a GPS that only tells you if you've arrived. You need to know, are we on track or off track? Do we need to make adjustments? Particularly because the first times you try strategies out, they need to be adjusted to work. And so you need to know if they're working or not working. So we would say your data needs to be gathered weekly, and it needs to surface what's happening with every student. It can't be a group score. You want to know which ones are succeeding and aren't succeeding. And so I'm working on a book now called Data Rules, but in the definitive guide, there's a fair bit there about data, where you look at individual students, and you might be looking at student well-being. You might be looking at how well kids are experiencing the learning. You might well look at the knowledge, skills, or big ideas students are acquiring or they're transferring in their life. And there's tools, whether it's selected response or rubrics or whatever it might be, to measure the achievement. And then there's different ways of measuring the engagement.
And I think engagement is quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there's that deception that students can look busy, but actually they're not doing much. And it's how you measure whether they're actually kind of engaged and actually understanding and retaining the information versus just being good and looking like they're doing something. I think is quite a big thing at the moment for us anyway over here.
Well, I think the do they look like they're learning is helpful if they're clearly not looking like they're learning. So if your kids are like 50% off task, they're not doing the task, then setting a goal around on-task behavior would work. But if they're looking like they're on task, but they're not really getting out of it what you want to get out of it, then there's a whole host of ways. We call a thing called experience sampling, where kids report back on their level of engagement. The trouble is, the more valid the data is, sometimes the less reliable it is, because it relies on student self-reporting. It could be exit tickets every week. It could be interviews. There's a lot of things you could do to gather data on the students. But to get really reliable data, it's usually less valid. So you have to trade off. Given this particular group of students, Do I want to go for time on task, which is reliable, but not, I don't know. I can't read their mind. They might be thinking, wouldn't it be cool? Whatever they're thinking, we don't know. But if you ask them to tell you what they're thinking, they may not give you an accurate picture. So all data is imperfect. You just have to pick the data that's the least imperfect and the most helpful. And sometimes in the midst of the cycle, you're going to make some changes to how you gather data.
I find that when it comes to individual lessons, students tell you what they think they should say. But if you discuss like a subject as a whole, they'll be completely and utterly honest about everything. So you can either get one or the other with the students, that they kind of are completely open and just tell you everything, or it's kind of they just say what you think you need to hear to get kind of, I need to get on with my day, miss. It's I think that I'd love. I'm very intrigued about your new book about data. I'll have to get you back on to chat about that one now. But yeah, because I just think it's especially since things have changed with COVID. I think the way students are very better adapted to kind of making it look or do the more. I guess I'm reflecting on my year 9 group, that they're kind of the ones before they choose their GCSEs, that they're doing subjects that they know they're not going to continue, so they're kind of doing the minimum, but it's how you engage them and how you can kind of boost that is quite is kind of where I'm reflecting at the moment. But I know when I hit my GCSEs, they want to be there, so the engagement is much higher and the outcomes are much higher. So it's difficult, isn't it, when the students don't necessarily want to be there, how you can kind of balance it with the ones that do.
Yeah, I would say the thing is to ask yourself, what would it look like if the kids were doing what I want them to do, and then how could I measure that? So if we take your ninth level 9 group, maybe the answers they're giving to questions are pretty clearly teacher pleasing answers. They're just saying what they think you want to say. And you could say, what I really want them to do is to give original responses. And then you and the coach could figure out what would be the difference. How would we know it when we see this and we know that? And then the coach can take out a seating chart and just record which kids are giving more authentic responses, or if you wanted to look at the level of the response, you and the coach would work it out. And then you figure out, well, maybe we need to have more questions related to real life, or maybe we need to look at the level of questions. Too many of the questions are closed, right or wrong questions. And I need to ask more application questions or more open questions. And well, that's not doing it either. We really need to stir the kids up a little bit with a controversy or something to get them interested. And then we ask the questions. So once you've got the goal in this case would be how many kids are giving original responses as opposed to teacher pleasing responses, however you would define that. Then you keep messing around with strategies until you got this lively, vibrant conversation of engaged students that you were striving for. That's how the process works. So the two of you are just working it out. You're just learning and thinking together.
Yeah, it's quite. I've changed my scheme of learning to do more making at the end. So it's the closer we get to the making, the more engaging they are getting there. But they are slowly coming around to still loving the subject.
But see, if I came to your class and I said, I notice your kids aren't responding to your questions, this is what you should do. It wouldn't be nearly as powerful as if I came to your class and I said to you, tell me about your students, what they're doing, and what they're not doing, and what you'd like them to do. And then you start we establish the strategy. And then I say, what are you thinking you might do? And you might say, well, I have no idea. If I knew what to do, I'd be doing it. And I say, well, if it's okay with you, I'll share a bunch of things. You tell me which one gives you the most confidence. Then you pick the one, you try it out, and it's probably not going to work very well. Then we have to make some adjustments. So it may be it didn't work well because it's your first time, and you might say, I'm going to get it. I just need to make some adjustments, or maybe the way you're measuring the goal doesn't work very well, or whatever. You make adaptations and adjustments until the goal gets hit. That's how it works.
And in terms of like, if you're taking it up a level and it was for like teachers, what do you think the best way of gathering data on other kind of teachers within your school, like kind of your if you're like a middle leader on people in your department, or if you're senior leaders just the teachers across the school? Because obviously here in England, we've had a lot of debate about Ofsted, and there's a lot of, obviously they come in and do inspections and they're quite hardcore. But I think that it needs to be more of a kind of open process. Like my previous trust that I worked for, senior leaders would just walk in and out of the classroom every day. I never had a day where I didn't have somebody pop into my lesson and they would just wander out. I never really got feedback. They were like, if we're worried about something, then we'll have a conversation. But it felt very normal, and I was happy to have teachers in my classroom and watch me. I would go and watch other people. Like, it was quite a nice kind of community feel. But I feel like since COVID, obviously things have changed a bit, but I feel like it's quite often that idea of tracking teachers and seeing the data of teachers is seen as quite a negative thing. But actually, I think it's something that we need to do, but it's how do we get kind of teachers on side, and how do we do it well, that it's kind of justified?
Yeah, well, I think you should gather data that helps reveal. First off, there's evaluation and there's coaching, and they're not the same thing. When you're evaluating someone, you're comparing them to a standard. You say, how do you stack up against this standard? A standard could be an evaluation tool. It could be any number of different things, but it's not coaching. Coaching is where together we identify, and you're the one who makes the decisions of what happens in your class. You identify the area you want to work on. And then I help you hit that goal. And that goal has to be a powerful goal, one that's going to have an unmistakably positive difference in kids' lives. Now, I'm not going to sit down with you and have a long coaching conversation if we're working on something that's trivial. We're going to work on something that will really make a difference. But I have to let go of the notion that they have to choose my goal. What matters is not that it's mine or theirs. What matters is that they've got a goal they're emotionally compelled to hit that will really make a difference for kids. Once we've got that goal, then we say, well, okay, well, how are we going to measure that? And there are lots of different ways of measuring it, but it's not some checklist that I come in and watch them and make sure they're doing what I think they should do. It's professional discourse. It's a professional who thinks about what they do and says, like you, I really want a different kind of response from my kids to questions, or a different level of engagement, and I'm wondering how I could get that. And then the coach sees your strengths. You can tell they're on your side. They believe in you, and they share ideas, but they don't share ideas trying to talk you into it. They say, what about this? What about this? What about this? And there's this back and forth until the goal gets hit, as opposed to, I'm here to watch you and tell you what you did right and what you did wrong. Besides which, how ridiculous to think that one person come into the classroom for 45 minutes and know more about it than the teacher who's been there all year. It's kind of silly.
I agree. I think that's the thing. I think the profession, certainly in the UK, needs to change more, that it's coaching and going and observing and coaching those lessons, as opposed to it being something that you're being judged on. I think it needs to be, we need to, as teachers, have more open conversations. And I think that would actually help with teacher retention. I know I can't remember which section it is in your earlier section, but I think it was the leader and coach about kind of the mental well-being as well. Like you need to have a positive mental check and look after yourself, and it shouldn't be a stressful job, because we love it and we enjoy it, but it should be this kind of nice, enjoyable atmosphere and process that we go through being teachers.
Right. I think it's the best people are the ones who are most concerned about getting better all the time. So continuous improvement isn't limited to new teachers. And in fact, I would say if I was a coach in a school, the first people I would work with would be the informal leaders in the school. So people will say, I see you're working with that person. Why aren't you working with me? I want to start with the stars, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then people will go, oh, well, this is really a great thing. I want to be and coaching should be a great thing. It should help you feel more efficacious. You should be more successful. As a result of coaching, your kids should be able to do more important things they weren't able to do before. And in fact, if coaching doesn't bring about meaningful change, it's a waste of time. It should be focused on really developing student success. And by helping develop student success, building teacher efficacy.
And your chapter 6 is on your playbook, which I just love the concept of. But actually, the more I read of it, I was like, oh yeah, just write down every strategy and then you'll never forget anything. But then actually, when I read more of it, I was like, no more than 15 to 20 strategies. And I'm like, that's actually more me. Because when when I go on courses and stuff and I see people talking about things, I'm like, oh, I completely forgot about that. I never do that anymore. And it's actually because I've honed it down to, I have these 15 and 20 strategies that I'm really good at, that I kind of rotate around. And actually there's nothing wrong with that. And actually you're better off having those and doing those well than trying to add in lots of things that you're not practicing regularly. So therefore you're not as good as delivering.
Yeah, it's not like a magic number, but we would say you need to know uh, your materials really, really well, and better to know a small number really well than a large number really superficially. And because others won't be able to do something you can't describe, and if you don't have that depth of knowledge, you won't be able to describe it. So we're limiting it to a small number only because we would say you need to know it really, really well, better to get depth of understanding. But the thing is, the strategies that are in the playbook, it's not like we've identified these are the best things you have to do. The strategies help teachers hit their goals. So over time, you develop more and more practices that you can see really work, and other ones go off your list because nobody uses them, or because something's identified that's more effective, or somebody goes to a conference and sees something and they want to try it. So the playbook is in creating the playbook, you should have real depth of understanding. That's the first thing. To create it, you need to understand it well. And then it's filled with communication tools, checklists, and what we call one-pagers to describe the strategies. But then at the same time, it's a living document. So it's always being revised. You work with a teacher and you realize, I could describe this more clearly on a checklist this way. And then when we sit down with the teacher with the checklist, we don't say, this is the way it has to be. We say, let's go through this thing and discuss it together. And in those discussions, often teachers have great suggestions for improvement. And then we, over time, this playbook becomes the place we keep track of what do we know about effective instruction. And again, the key thing though is that they're helping people hit their goals. They're not the best practices. They're the best practices for helping teachers hit their goals. If they don't help teachers hit their goals, there's no point in having them in the playbook.
So would you say to kind of, if you were doing it on a whole school basis, to have like kind of areas that you want to focus on? So for example, my school currently is focusing on challenge, but we're all doing challenge in different ways because it depends on how our subject works. But I've got my playbook of how I do challenge, but it's very different to science. And it's kind of, you can kind of still link it, but it has that autonomy of kind of what it means to you to do those things.
Oh, I'm not really sure. I really don't know about whole school versus coaching.
Okay, because that's the thing. A lot of schools are kind of trying to bring in kind of coaching from a whole school perspective on kind of CPD and how you can kind of bring it and kind of. I think it's nice as well when it's backed up with like a learning group where teachers go and try things and then have those discussions and kind of talk about it and have that kind of safe place to make mistakes, but then be able to kind of refine their strategies. Is quite nice.
Well, there are different things, the whole school exploration and implementation, but that puts the focus on the strategies. Whereas instructional coaching, as we define it, puts the focus on what matters to kids.
Yeah.
So we start with kids. And I've just seen too often whole school stuff is just kind of nominal. It's a name only. We're not really doing it. We talk about it, but in terms of real change, there's not much change happening. There's not much that's happening, and often it feels divorced from reality to some extent. Now, having said that, I think it could work. It's just, and I suppose coaching could help with it, but I would say the goal is critical. If you don't have a goal the person wants to hit, people will just dip their toes into it. They just do the bare minimum. So whatever you're doing, so long as the teachers can see the power of it and they're excited about it, and it's guided by a change in students rather than a focus on a strategy, then I think it could work.
Because that's generally like kind of with schools here with their performance management, you kind of have a whole school strategy. Like, for example, ours is challenging and how are we getting those students, how are we challenging our students and not letting them just sit comfortably, that they are kind of being pushed and trying, and how we do that. But then you also have your personalized one, that what's your target, what do you want to do for the kids that are going to kind of benefit them, what's personal to kind of specific. So quite a lot often, like the whole school one's more kind of our lower school, and then when we get to our exam students, that's where you can be kind of more personal, I think, in terms of what you want to get out of them. But I just find I find there's just so many different ways of applying it, because there's your relationship with the students, that you can coach the students and how you build that relationship with them, and how you can question them and get the best out of them, and how you can focus your learning and teaching styles to them. But then you've also got the trainee teachers, how you can get them to be reflective and think about their pedagogy and the skills that they can use. But then there's also kind of the head of department or senior leaders, and how you can coach other teachers to improve and re-engage, I guess, with learning, and how they get the best out of their team and the best out of their subject. So there's different layers, and it depends, I guess, which one you're applying it to, which I suppose leads to the kind of your where you work last bit, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
And it's kind of working out there's lots of different ways you can be a coach, but it's making sure you do it the best way for each one.
Yeah, I mean, we believe in what we call freedom within form. And so we have a structure to our coaching cycle, we call the impact cycle. And there's steps we move through, and stages, 3 stages: identify, learn, and improve. And so that's pretty consistent. And it's the product of 20 years of making mistakes, over time. We've tried this and tried that, and some things have worked and some things haven't worked. So we've made more and more adjustments. But it's different every time. And the goal is going to be different. The teacher is going to be different. And the whole process is going to be a little bit different. So when we get into the impact cycle, it's pretty consistently the same structure. It is really like the melody of a song. It could be played by Ornette Coleman, or it could be played by the Berlin Philharmonic. The song could be played differently, but the song still is there. I should probably use some British examples. So it could be played,
no, it's fine. It
could be played by Radiohead or the London Symphony.
Brilliant, perfect. And is there, I suppose, like, I've read it all the way through, but is it something that you can dip in and out of, or would you say that there's a section that's the most important, or would you say equally it's all as important as one another?
Okay, I would say if you're just going to read one chapter and focus on one part, it would be chapter 4, which is the impact cycle. Yeah. To me, understanding the coaching process is it's like getting in the pool if you're a swimmer. You can't learn until you're doing it. And so that's kind of what you do. I'd say that's key. And one idea I suggest to people is just to skim the book initially to see what they want to do with it. I would say for instructional coaching, it's built around 7 factors. All 7 factors are essential. If you don't know what your teaching practices are, you don't know how to gather data, you're not a good communicator or listener. Any of those things, if they're not there, it's going to be problematic. So I think they're all important. But you could knock out the book in 30 minutes if all you did was read the maps at the beginning, skim it, read the summary at the end, and you could see, I kind of got what that chapter's about, and work your way through it, and then come back and go into it in more detail. But it's not that long. It's only about, I think, 60,000 words, so it's a little shorter than some books.
No, I found it very easy to read, and it was nice. It was kind of, you had the scenarios and then the information and then the breakdown, and it flowed really nicely. And it's the perfect time of year, really, over here in the UK. We're 6 weeks away, the most of us. All those people in private schools get to break up early, but we're almost on the summer holiday. So I definitely recommend getting this from your John Katz and having a read of it over the summer holidays, to kind of go in with a fresh mind to September. I know I've made little notes for it, and there's definitely bits that once my year 11s officially disappear in 2 weeks' time, once all the exams are done, so then I'm like going to go through and do some of the more of the reflective tasks. As I just think that actually sometimes we read and actually we don't reflect, and kind of we're not very good learners ourselves, teachers, and we shouldn't forget to do those bits as well.
Well,
and we're almost at the end, so thank you so much for joining me. We did get through all 7 chapters. What's next for you then?
Well, I'm actually going to be in the UK July 4th, I think, at Leeds Beckett University. We're doing a thing on instructional coaching there for a day, and then I think I'm presenting at the Festival of Education. So I'll be in England for a little bit in July, and I'm working on this book, Data Rules, which is the next writing project. So I'm looking forward to that. And then our big conference is the Teaching, Learning, Coaching Conference. It's coming up in October, and Oliver Caviglioli and Tom Sherrington are going to be there. We're excited about them. Rachel Lofthouse is going to present virtually. So if you can't come to United States for the conference, it's a virtual conference too. So lots of stuff. There's always things going on. We're always trying to keep moving forward, spreading the word.
I think that's the one great thing that's come out of COVID, I feel, is the fact that all this virtual learning, that we can actually get into each other and see kind of people live and actually have those interactions, which is really nice. Can I ask, because you've written quite a lot of books, how long do they take to write?
Oh, about 3 times as long as I think. The trouble is you have a life, and you have other things to do. Like if I was, I don't know, an author who all they did was write, it would be a lot easier, and probably better books. But, tomorrow I'm flying to Kentucky and I'm going to present there the next day. And then, there's a lot happening in the next few weeks. And then we're having this conversation, but I have other meetings all day. And so the actual writing takes quite a while. And what I would say about the writing is the first thing you write is always trash. I mean, you look at it and you're like, I don't know what I'm thinking. What do I think I'm going to... So you have to have faith that it's going to be good. And you just read it until it's a book you like reading, and you just edit, because writing is more about editing than the actual writing. And I'd say you have to stick with it. If you have to write at 6 a.m. before you go to school, or, you have to find a time and do it, because the world will find all kinds of reasons to keep you from doing your work. There's a wonderful book called The War of Art. And the author has written quite a few books about creativity. And, he says it's almost like there's a resistance that keeps you from doing the work. So you have to stick with it. If it looks like garbage, it doesn't matter. You can't clean up nothing, but you can clean up the garbage. You can make it better, and just keep moving forward, little bits by little bits by little bits. And eventually there's a book.
Well, this one certainly isn't garbage. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you so much for coming on and answering my questions. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
I'm grateful that you let me squeeze in here, and I'm so glad that I actually got on. I was getting pretty stressed out, so it's great to be here. And thank you so much
in the end.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And if you missed any of tonight's show, then you can listen back on the podcast soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.